We're live.
All right, welcome back from lunch break, everyone. So we are doing an introduction and a walkthrough on our long-awaited bill pertaining to emergency management and flood response. I would like to start with an introduction from the lead sponsor of the bill.
Hello, committee. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Edward.
It's been a long time. First I want to thank the committee for its attention to this, for its getting this bill on the agenda quickly. And just start with that this bill represents the collective mind hive, if you will, of the Flood Caucus and the flood impacted towns across the state. The process for putting this bill together was myself and Gina Galfetti, who's the other lead sponsor and co-chair of the Flood Caucus, did individual outreach.
Could you introduce yourself for the record?
But of course, Edward Teddy Wazazak, representing Berry City.
Even though you got a half an intro. I wanted to formalize.
Well,
Thank you,
yeah,
sir.
Thank you.
informal.
And so, just to reiterate that this is not like a Teddy wish list of flood response. I did not discriminate as to what was put into the bill or left out. Anything that a member from a flood impacted town told me would help their town made it into this bill. So that's the product that's in front of you today. The point of this bill is to build strong flood response systems across the state and streamline and make clear who is responsible for what in the aftermath of a flooding event in Vermont. And I know time is short, so I want to be quick, but I do want to share just one quick story from Barry's North End. After the 2023 flood, there was one woman I think she was on 2nd Street in Barry, where the flood came about waist high into her first floor. It took 11 months for her to clean up and repair her home. And about 2 weeks before the 2024 flood, she finished renovations. And then 2 weeks later, on July 10th of 2024, I was mucking out her basement and she got exactly a week and a half of her first floor back before she lost everything again. And we were mucking out her basement for many hours that morning after the flood. And then she left. We didn't know where she went. And she came back with 10 pizzas for her volunteers that were mucking out her basement, paid for out of her own pocket. That is a reality that is with her every day, and that is with thousands of our community members across the state. The flood never ended for a lot of people that are still going through these things. And so I just want to center us in that experience because those are the folks that we are here to help. So diving into this bill, should I just go section by section, give a quick recap or?
So we have council on behind you. So council, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Oh, we certainly can, sir. How would you prefer to do this rundown? Would you like the representative to speak to the sections, or would you prefer to?
That is your prerogative and choice. However you would like to proceed, I will comply. And so
All right, thank you for referring that to me. All right, representative, let's do a jaunt with you and a deeper dive with council.
Okay, and I think I will just summarize this bill section by section. If there are questions, I leave that to the chair. You can interrupt me or what have you. So section 1 is the Division of Emergency Management. The first chunk of the bill there instructs the Chief Recovery Officer in consultation with some other stakeholders to put together a statewide framework for flood preparedness, response, and recovery. And like I said at the beginning, the intent of this language is to have a statewide plan for who is responsible for what between the state, between VEM, between VTrans, between FEMA. Have one place that everyone knows what their roles and responsibilities are, so we're not scrambling figuring out who's responsible for what in the immediate aftermath of a flood. The second part of this section is to offer financial and technical assistance to municipalities for a variety of things in the aftermath of the flood, led by the Chief Recovery Officer. And again, these were all recommendations from members from flood impacted towns of what they specifically could use technical and financial assistance. Jumping on to section 2, financial assistance for impacted municipalities. The section A there at the beginning is to cover expenses for the all hazard flood events while awaiting reimbursements from FEMA. This is specifically targeted at towns like Plainfield, whose immediate damages outmeasured their entire annual budget. The city of Barry is fortunate in that we have some more fungible money that we can move around in a pinch when we have to. Plainfield just straight ran out of cash in the aftermath of the flood, and they could not wait for FEMA reimbursements to get contractors in to get folks to start fixing their roads. Second section there is a re-upping of something that was done last year. I believe it was in the governor's budget last year, which covers the local match requirements from FEMA programs. It's typically 75-25 or 80-20, depending on the event. And last year, the state covered those financial matches, and we were asking for that to be done again. Section 3 is focused more on homeowners and individuals for assistance. The first is a volunteer buyout program, which shall allow a municipality at the request of the owner of a flood impacted property to apply for funding to cover the purchase price of that property. This is for properties or property owners who are in a pinch, who do not feel safe in their homes, who should not be living in these homes because they are very flood prone, but for one reason or the other did not qualify for FEMA's rules. So it's asking the state to step in and help make those folks whole. And the second is the homeowner assistance program, which would provide homeowners with money to rebuild or relocate or renovate their homes in a flood resilient way, because we know it is possible to build flood resilient housing, but it takes a lot of money to get there. And this is looking to be a way for folks to stay in their homes, to stay where they want to stay, and just provide them with assistance to build their homes in that way. Section 4 amends the Municipal Mitigation Assistance Program to provide funding for specifically rural and flood-prone municipalities to upgrade their infrastructure and create and maintain emergency access routes for use during an all-hazard event. Section 5, agency support for certain town highway projects. This instructs state assistance for help with design of stormwater management systems and additional technical assistance for specialized specific improvements such as town highways, and also an asset management system so that in the aftermath of a flood, the agency knows, where are our trucks, where are our workers, who are they helping now, who are they going to help in the next few days. And this was in response to confusion as to, who was sending what where. In Barry, we got some trucks down from Burlington. That information was not necessarily fed back up to the state. So at one point, the state called Burlington and said, hey, can you send your trucks to, just going to say for sake of argument, St. Johnsbury? No, they're already helping in Barry. So it's looking to streamline that process. And the last bit of that section on the top of page 8 is provision for what we're calling the flood fleet. There are many specialized trucks, different kinds of equipment that are necessary in large quantities in the immediate aftermath of a flood. One specific piece of equipment is called a Vactor, which is basically kind of looks like an elephant. It has a giant hose and it helps clean drains and it can help muck out buildings. The city of Barry has one of those in our public works garage. In the immediate aftermath of the flood, we could have used 7 if we had them, but it makes no financial sense for the city of Barry to buy 7 of them when 9 times out of 10 we only need 1. And again, the city of Barry, in the grand scheme of things, is a more resourced municipality, smaller towns who could not afford even 1 Vactor if they needed to. So this portion of the bill instructs the state to purchase a few of those equipments and have them strategically placed throughout the state at the VTrans facility in Waterbury. Have 3 or 4 of them hanging out there, so when our towns do get hit, they can be deployed to assist the municipalities. Section 6 talks about A&R establishing a program to improve stream flow projects in response to flood risks. And Section 7 also just instructs A&R to establish some programs to take a watershed-wide look at where some of the most impactful flood resiliency, riverbank naturalization, et cetera, projects might go. Because right now we're sort of doing, Pat Moulton and Doug Farnham, who are 2 of our chief recovery people, are doing a really good job at encouraging and convening municipalities to work together. So if we do some stream bed naturalization in Barry, what does that mean for the folks who are downriver of us? But it is frankly pretty ad hoc right now. And due to our, which I know you all talk a lot about, our lack of strong county government, the only other entity who can do that bird's eye view work right now is the state and the Agency of Natural Resources. Section 8 is 2 positions within the Division of Emergency Management. The first is a municipal grant liaison, which would assist municipalities in navigating the many state and federal grant programs that do already exist to help these towns build back better, for lack of a better phrase, in a flood resilient way. But as we all know, it takes a lot of paperwork. It takes a lot of time to navigate both state and federal programs. And again, this is a situation where cities like Barrie and Montpelier, who have 100+ members of municipal staff, they can move people around and they can get to work on some of these, some of our small towns, specifically in the Northeast Kingdom, who have a part-time clerk, a part-time administrator, and a volunteer select board of 3 people. Frankly, the programs are just not getting to them because they don't have the time or expertise to acknowledge them or to go through the process of applying for, well, first finding and then applying for, and then doing the follow-up reporting necessary to get access to those grant funds. So that's what that position would be responsible for. And the flood mitigation technician, which is another full-time exempt position, would help do some of that work with A&R in the previous sections to take a statewide view, to take a watershed-wide view and recommend prioritization of flood resiliency projects to help mitigate flooding in towns and towns downriver of said towns. Section 9, this was in response to members from small towns who reported that they had trouble finding out about emergency announcements of they did not have the infrastructure, both real infrastructure and communications infrastructure in place to identify when a flood was coming, to get the word out, to encourage people to evacuate, and there was an ask for stronger systems in place there. So in section 9, there are a couple suggestions for surface water flood monitoring devices, basically a little alarm that when the water gets to a certain level, the alarm goes off and everyone knows a flood is coming. And there is federal money available for purchasing those devices, something I happen to know. And yeah, just other types of alert and monitoring systems to communicate to specifically our small towns when a flood may be imminent. Section 10 of the bill is the transfer of what is colloquially known as the Randall Meadow, which is around 56, Tucker has the exact number, acres of land near the old state hospital in Waterbury that is currently a state-owned cornfield. And it is right now at a certain elevation, and it could be brought down to a lower elevation if the town were the owner of that property. And that would go a long way towards preventing further flooding in specifically downtown Waterbury, which I would argue would save the state a lot of money in the long run. And we know that Waterbury has persistently experienced flooding from Hurricane Irene 2023 and 2024 floods.
Pause button, please, sir. Representative Wood.
Just a quick question. Do you know, is that field currently used for agriculture purposes or?
Yes, it's currently a cornfield.
Okay.
I truthfully do not know what they do with the corn,
Okay.
but it is a cornfield.
Representative.
Also, out of all of these things, totally have a question about this cornfield.
If that's our biggest question mark, I'm thrilled.
It's the biggest problem I have. Why can't the state lower the cornfield? Why does Waterbury have to own it in order for it to be lowered?
My understanding is that historically the state has wanted to maintain current use of that field. And that has been, this was a request specifically from both members from Waterbury, that the town and the community would feel more comfortable if the town was the one in control of what is the largest floodplain in downtown Waterbury. Cool, great. And then the last section is section 11, which I've described sort of, it's a gap assessment, it's a needs assessment, it's a pressure release valve. The intent of section 11 is so that if there's anything in this bill that we are asking the state to do that they cannot do with current resources, whether that is staffing or financial resources, that they report back by, the bill has December 15th, the date on that report, can be changed, but report back with, if there's anything in here that you can't do, why can't you do it, and what would you need to do that? So that next year when we come back, the state can have the conversation about which of these things we can afford to fully fund and fully resource and add staff to, and so.
Representative Daniel.
Thanks. This particular provision for the report.
Yeah.
Like those factors, or is that expected to already be with state money to purchase those? That state money that already exists?
Yeah, I mean,
One thing that if it doesn't exist, they would come back and say, we need X number of $100,000 to buy these particular vehicles.
Yeah, and I think that, the Transportation Committee, when they do the T-bill every year, they make a decision about what equipment should or should not be purchased new versus what's already existing in our fleets. So I think that is one example of, if the Transportation Committee in appropriation says, listen, we need X amount more of appropriation to do that. But if through the course of the T-bill, they decide that those are things that they would like to purchase anyway, go for it. But if not, what is the barrier to doing that? And please let us know that, so that next year we can figure out how to get them the resources they need. Cool. All right.
Wonderful. And I think that was actually deep enough where you can bypass council. Any questions for the representative? Representative.
Just one quick one. If the Vector trucks are owned by the state, are we gonna train some of the state employees, some of our truck drivers already? Because I've operated this equipment myself.
Yeah.
And it is specialized.
Yep.
You can get hurt using it if you're not trained for it.
Yeah.
Are we gonna train up existing drivers? Cause you need at least a Class B license to operate them?
I would
Or
assume so, and I would,
What's
yeah,
your thought to that?
yeah, I mean, I think I would assume that if the Agency of Transportation or the Transportation Committee is authorizing them to purchase equipment, that it would follow that the agency would then train them on how to use that equipment. How many trained Vector drivers we have on staff right now, I don't know the answer to that. But yeah, but we have one in the city of Barry, so they could send some folks over to Barry and we
Right,
can
there-
spend a day teaching them how to use Vectors.
Right, they only need about a qualified truck driver would only need about a day to qualify on it.
Yep.
And just whoever's helping them with that hose, because you can get caught up in it.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
so yeah, no, if that was kind of the plan, to have state employees that are current without adding positions and just having the vehicles available.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think too, looping back to, many municipalities do already have some of this equipment, just not enough of it. So I think it would also be up to the municipalities in the state to communicate, all right, please send us 2 Vectors, because we have 2 guys here who can drive them. We just don't have the trucks in yet. As opposed to, can you send us 2 Vectors and 2 drivers? Because I'm just gonna pick on Linden because it's the first time that's popping into my head. We don't have those on staff. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
I was just, because that helps.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank
Anything else? You wanna hang out, hang out? You have committee, you have committee.
I'm not.
Okay, so what I wanna do right now is actually just get to the big guest that we have here, to offer testimony on this. Now, as we've discussed leading up into this is a vehicle for multiple other bills that we are considering for inclusion in this bill and other conversations. So, some of the conversations and testimony we'll have today will speak to things that may or may not be in this bill directly, but we have discussed. And with that, I would like to invite David DiBiase, City of Regents, Fire Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Steve, sir.
It's so nice to see you as well, in your fancy new committee room, my dad.
We are humbled by the accommodations.
It looks wonderful. It looks much different from last time I was up here. Well, thank you all for inviting me here today. My name is Dave DiBiase. I think she got some slides or some PDF to put up. We'll walk through together. So I am here today, and I'll give a little disclosure here. There's no part of the state of Vermont, but somebody as a concerned fire chief and a part of the system, I shall say, as a MO aid department that operates within the state when things go bad, such as the rep was just explaining. But before we get to recovery, it's really the response side of those things. So I stole this logo. So we're not endorsed by Vermont Task Force 1 or any others, but this is public documents, and we wanted to make sure that there's a clear definition between DPS is not here screaming for money, but the locals that are concerned, much like we just heard on the recovery side, that if these teams aren't funded and equipped properly, that we put the Vermonters at this huge risk before we ever get to the chance to do better in recovery, which is a huge deal as well. So again, Dave DiBiase, City of Virginia's Fire Chief, I'm also the second vice president of the Vermont State Firefighters Association, representing all the volunteers in the state of Vermont. A past USAR member. I was formerly the deputy commissioner of BGS before my new role. And I got the USAR team. The only reason I left, but it also gives me the opportunity to stay on the outside here and have some different conversations as well. So that's me in a nutshell. I also have Dean Gilmore here from the coalition and Derek Libby, who is the chief of Montpelier Fire Department, just as supporters of the mission here and the things that we're looking for today for you guys. I know this came up before you in testimony last year to the members that were here. And we happen to have the Director Foran here who did a lot of that testimony. So we're going to carry off of that. I think this committee did a heck of a job creating USAR and statute, really. And that was fantastic and a great first step in the process. But since then, funding has not followed. So they're still, to this day, not being funded by the state of Vermont to the operations that we all rely on when things get really bad in the state. We can drop down to the next one. I can't tell because I'm not watching you. So, wow, that looks pretty good. What happened to that picture? So there's 90 members, right? For you guys that may be new or not sure, these are generally part-time employees, temporary part-time employees of the state of Vermont that are doctors, EMTs, engineers, all walks of life that they do get paid as a part-time, but these are people that have full-time jobs that when the call goes out, there's massive flooding, there's a building collapse, there's a structural fire that has had some sort of fatality or injury that requires the building to be shored up to do the investigation. They call these folks out and say, hey, who can come, right? Who out of these 90 folks? We need an engineer, we need a K9 handler, we need a Swiftwater team. And then this team with one full-time employee of the state of Vermont being Mike Cannon oversees collecting all the people, making a plan, and then executing that plan in the state of Vermont. The disciplines, so Swiftwater rescue, rope rescue, confined space, and structural collapse. They get activated by Vermont Emergency Management. So as the fire chief of the city of Virgins, I've got some really horrible thing going on. I've got a building collapse. The town is flooding. Virgins is on a hill. We're pretty good right now. We should be all right. But we're flooding. We're overcome our resources in a very quick order of magnitude, and we need more. We call Vermont Emergency Management watch officer. We say, Eric, we're drowning here, literally. Can you send me some resources? And the state's first line of defense is either a close by friend of ours, which probably we've called already, but really it's the state of Vermont's USAR team. So they activate USAR. They say, all right, USAR, we need you guys to send and support the city of Virgins with a flooding incident. They come up again, they put their notice out, they find their people out of these volunteers, really is what I'm going to call them, because they're not making a full-time gig off doing this work for the state of Vermont. They put a team together and they send resources to the local municipalities that are needing of these teams. Virgins is lucky we've got some of this stuff. Most of the towns in the state do not. There's only 11 teams in the state of Vermont that have a MOA with VEM to supply additional resources to the state when these things get really bad, really primarily in the Swiftwater sense. So boats, swimmers, people that know what's going on. They also oversee the high water vehicles when the National Guard gets deployed as part of that package. So again, from a local aspect, this is the state's first line of defense to give the municipality something, much like we just heard about recovery, when we say, we're overcome, we have no idea what to do, please send help immediately. These are the guys. And I say that seemed very urgent. When it comes to pre-planned events, like we looked at through the last 2 Julys, those events are going on for weeks, and certainly leading up to the days before the event, they're pre-planning these events with Vermont Emergency Management, I would say hourly throughout that incident, understanding if we need more teams from out of state, we need a federal team to come into state. If these guys look and say we need a federal team, like you see the Mass Task Force 1, which is our closest federal team, that's about 18 hours from the time that Vermont Emergency Management sends out a request saying, we need help, we got this thing coming, it's gonna be really horrible. It's 18 hours before we see them, hopefully, in ideal conditions, to the state line to start being put to work. And sometimes they got to rest right in between that period. So that's what we got as the state of Vermont. And really this presentation is around, we have never funded them as the state. It's never been funded by general fund. These guys have scraped together grants. They apply for grants for their own positions. They apply for grants for some equipment, and I'm all for grants, but it should not be the baseline of running a program that is the first line of defense for the Vermonters when things are going really, really horrible. Yes, Matt. Mr. Chair, excuse me.
No worries, Doris. We have a casual relationship outside of it. All good. So anyway, so the grants are, have those been subject to federal scrutiny?
The grants. So I can speak to what I know, and you know the directors here. They were expecting, and I think Eric, the director told you guys last year there was a reduction coming, just in generality from the federal government. I don't know that they've seen any impact from the craziness going on. So not to my knowledge, and I'm not going to put Eric on the spot that's happened, but we all know what the environment is at this point in the world. And I do want to say, and I'm a little skeptical of grouping us into that group because it's growing, right? And this was a problem well before everybody's funding kind of got put out to pasture, and who knows what's going to happen in the world. These guys have been asking for years. They've gotten through it. They've found some money here. They found a pot there. But these are the people that are saving 280 Vermonters through the last storm. So we can go down to the next slide. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Go the other way. Perfect. So we talked about that for municipalities. So preparation planning is statewide coordinated response. So when these things happen, last July, we watched the weather, right? We knew there was a bad storm coming. You guys are all familiar with weathermen and how well that forecast goes. So hourly, multiple times a day, these folks are meeting, and I've been involved with these meetings through my other employment with the state. They are doing so much work to get ahead of this. But when it comes to assets on the ground to do the rescue, the main chess piece that they have on the board is the USAR team. And then putting out a request for additional teams that do that same subset of work, both regionally and nationally, depending on what's going on. Many of the storms that hit the East Coast affect a large swath of the East Coast, right? So we're like, oh, we'll just invite New Hampshire over. That works great, except for New Hampshire many times is the next state in line, or we'll grab New York, or we'll grab Massachusetts. We're all getting hit with many of those same storms at the same time. So we do have some relationships. This team has built some great relationships with states to the south of us, such as North Carolina, where they just spent a whole lot of time, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that as we go. But they're doing that planning. They're figuring out where do they put the resources, where do they put the teams before the storm hits. Are they going to put people in the southern end of the state? Are we going to prepare to have people in place so when things happen, we know that the state gets isolated in a hurry, right? Like there's many times in the state that you cannot get to a town or an area of the state because we washed out so many roads, bridges, or others that you can't get there. So VM does a heck of a job putting resources in those places the day before, if not 2 days before, understanding when the weather pattern's coming. So that's a big piece of the USAR team too. The other part of that is when those teams do come into state, say we've got a bunch of different regional teams or EMAC request or federal team, the USAR team in coordination with VM is working through the logistics and the operation of where do those teams go? What are we assigning them to? What is their mission going to be? Do we need more of them? These teams have been out for 12, 18 hours. We need to rest them. We need to rotate them. Where are we putting the gear? When a federal team comes into town, I don't know, Chief Libby, how many pieces of equipment do they come in?
Large footprint.
You need an airport sometimes to put the equipment in, which is a great resource, but it requires a large amount of space and a large amount of thought. And that is what also the USAR's team doing before we get there. We oversees the relationship with 11 local teams and the responses and readiness, including state-owned equipment, boats, motors, trailers, rafts, and peripheral equipment. So the head of this program makes sure that they have teams that are trained in local municipalities such as Virgins. They've been trained, they have the appropriate gear, and then sometimes they have equipment from the state of Vermont, such as boats, to supplement the local resources, because these things are expensive. You want to buy a boat, motor, and trailer, you're going to be talking, in a raft, you're talking $50,000. Most fire departments in the state don't have that money to shell out for a thing that happens more frequently in the state of Vermont, but not enough when you're trying to buy $1.5 million fire truck, right? So the state has these agreements with 11 local teams through the entire state to put this equipment in their hands. And this team oversees that those people are prepared to do the work. We can go down to the next one, please. So the team was formalized in 2024 through the act that you, this committee, and Senate GovOps also put through. It came through initially with funding. It was a $750,000 fund request. It got knocked down to a $250,000 one-time funding that they got last year. They're very thankful for. I can guarantee that because they don't usually get any money through the state. But again, we put them in statute. We said DPS, you can have these things, but we've not put a funding mechanism in place to fund this program. Currently housed in a V-Trans facility in Colchester. So there's a former V-Trans facility that was no longer good enough for V-Trans. It was an empty building. The state does what Vermonters do best. We made it work, right? They've been there for a number of years now, and they're stuck there. And I'll show you guys some pictures. Here's a picture on the left of how thick that equipment is in that building. And that is the entirety of the state's urban search and rescue equipment. So about $6 million of equipment in a building that is not fire protected, it has no sprinkler protection, is not staffed. And if a fire per se, gosh darn, hopefully never broke out, we would have nothing except for the boats that the 11 teams have around the state. And maybe the ones that are stored outside because the place isn't big enough to put the equipment inside at this point.
Understood.
So that's another part of this funding request is getting enough funding where they can look to lease. And we'll jump into a couple slides that do talk about that progress is how it came to be. We can go down one more. So 267 Vermonters through the last 2 flood events. That's a lot of people. Those are the people that they physically touched, brought somewhere, and brought them out of harm's way. I can't tell you how many others that they worked through to say, go over here, get out of there while they're that's 267 Vermonters that they physically rescued out of a situation that would have gone really bad and is certainly life-threatening. And without this team, who knows what that would have happened. The state, and let's say Dean's a little older than I am, and we're going to say that very nicely, there was a time, and certainly Chief Libby probably remembers, where the state did not have any coordinated effort. And there was teams staggered around the state that just did whatever. And as you can imagine, when it comes to statewide emergencies, such as we continue to experience, that doesn't work so well, right? Like these people we're sending teams here, this team's sending themselves over here. The guy, the town next to you is asking for a team, but they've already been sent a team maybe by VEM because they're not aware. So we've come a long ways in that aspect, but we're still requiring these folks to fund themselves through whatever means they can scratch up and put into a coffer somewhere. Training equipment are expensive and specialized. This isn't stuff that you guys go buy at Home Depot. Well, maybe your lumber, right? But besides that, these are boats, these are swimming, these are structural collapse construction that happens in other parts of this country. So very important, but very expensive, right? We can drop down to one more slide. You see a picture on the right there, or my left, your right, maybe? Oh, both left. Anybody know where that is? That's Vermont. That's like St. Johnsbury, Lyndonville area. And that was not part of the major flood, right? You guys remember that we had the big floods, and then we had this random middle of the night National Weather Service calling up the USAR team saying, there's a 6 inches of rain, 7 inches of rain coming into this region. This was not something that we saw. We didn't know about it, but immediately that team activated, pulled resources together to go help these municipalities, and they spent days in the Northeast Kingdom assisting. So it happens here, and I mean, Montpelier knows it. It looks a little different when it's downtown Montpelier than it does in, say, Plainfield, right? The Northeast Kingdom, where we've got the topography and the elevation that just ruins roads, bridges, and culverts in a hurry. You guys are doing a heck of a job working to stop that and prevent that. But when it comes to be, it's going to happen, and these are the guys going out the door to help us to do that. Talked about a lot of outside of disaster events. The team performed structural stabilization of fire scenes, so we talked a little bit about that. Last year, they went to 22 incidents, 21 of those being in the state of Vermont. The other singular one was in North Carolina, I think that's South Carolina, in Florida for Hurricane Helene. The team that saw the things that they saw down there still don't talk about what they saw down there. That was the extent of the devastation that this team went down there, represented the state of Vermont in a capacity and a professionalism that can't be understated. There's a reason that when you put out EMAC requests, it's kind of like a bidding war a little bit, where you put out your dollars, you put out your cents and your certifications, and either they know you or they don't. And hopefully you present yourself well and they select you to go somewhere else. That's what happens. Vermont has a great relationship, which works both ways, right? We get to go help our neighbors, but when Vermont's up the creek, we're swimming, we get to request those people, and we know them, we know who they are, and they'll come help us when we need it. So very important. All right, we can go down one more. So here's just a breakdown of what the USAR team did last year. So they did 3 incidents where they supported 8 local agencies with technical support, communications, engineering support, or UAVs. So those are the drones. So they have drone program as well that they can find folks. They have canines that do a lot of this, unfortunately, body recovery and searching for victims through rubble and debris. Supporting state agencies, technical support, communication, sheltering, UAV, shoring, and other. You know, sheltering is a funny one. Nobody thinks about that, right? But during my time with VGS, there was many instances working with VEM They were like, well, who's gonna do this thing that we need to do? Who's gonna launch this shelter? Who's gonna go get the cots from the warehouse and bring them over? We don't just have staff sitting around that are not otherwise employed to do something. So then we, many times we'd activate the USAR team and they'd bring in a truck and a trailer and the equipment they have and move shelters or move beds, move cots, move pillows, go do these things to help us set up, maybe man a shelter if we needed to during that period of time. So they're kind of our Swiss Army knife in the state of Vermont when it comes to these things. Building collapse, flood response, I mean, they'll speak for themselves, and then out-of-state deployment. This is a picture from the southern end of the country, and that's what they were seeing down there. All right, one more down. So here, we're gonna talk a little bit more about their building. I don't know how well you can see that picture, but that is how this gets stored every single day when these guys go out the door. The front of that truck and the front of that trailer are no more than 6 inches apart. That's the only way they go back in that building. And that is as tight as you could possibly get. And as we talked about, there's no fire protection, there's no classrooms, there's no training areas, there's no break rooms in this facility. Has to go back in, many of these things have to go back in with a forklift. So all their boat trailers, because of the angle and how they put things in, the only way that it will fit is with a forklift to get inside this building. Again, they did what they had to do inside this garage, but it wasn't good enough for VTrans. They built a brand new facility, but now we're asking the entire state's resources for this emergency response to sit in a building that can't even hold what they have and requires them to play Tetris every time they get there. Some assets are left outside, so there's many times the trucks or trailers do not fit because either they're swapping over, they've gotten bigger, right? I don't think anybody's cars are getting smaller nowadays. The trucks, trailers are not getting smaller either. So they're storing things outside these. So these are state-owned assets that cost the taxpayers money that are outside in the rain, in the sun, appreciating. Go ahead, sorry.
Representative Boyd.
Just wondering if there's been any damage caused by any of your equipment because of the space.
Because of just in general, because in here, I'm sure that if
Playing Tetris,
I would say that I don't know for sure, but I would make a pretty good educated guess that there's been enough bumps and bruises putting things in and out of that facility. But I don't think anything detrimental. They know that what they've got is a shoestring, right? So if they break that door off that piece of equipment, the state, it's an insurance claim. They bust that thing that no longer works. They got to find that money somewhere. So they take extra care to do that well. But I'm sure there's duct tape on something in that shop right now that's holding a mirror together or something else. So does that answer your question? There's no areas for sleeping. So when these guys go, they may go days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks at a time. We may bring these federal teams in or these other state teams. There's no place for these people to get to even put their cots during that period of time, which is a dangerous situation on itself. All right, we can drop down to the next one. Here's just some pictures. So this is the entirety of the state's office for the USAR, Urban Search and Rescue and Support, to launch all state missions in the state of Vermont. That's what you got. That window right there behind you is plexiglass that was duct taped together for a period of time. This is what we're providing these people to put their lives at literal jumping and moving river down State Street in Montpelier to rescue residents of this state. This is what we give them to support that mission every day. We go down one more, just more pictures of that facility itself, because it's a large piece, right? So BGS, we did a lot of buildings, we did a lot of leases, everything's expensive. And right now there's no funding for that group and look for any other space with the hazmat team, which lives here as well with them. We can go down another slide. Here's the bathrooms. It's a highlight of the facility. If somebody ever wants to stop by and use them, I'm sure they'd love to give you guys a tour, but that's what we give them to operate out of. I don't know if you can see, it's not real pleasant. And I don't think anybody here would want to work in an environment that's where they're required to go every day and use the facilities. Yeah, so here's some more. This is a fun one. We're gonna do a little game and we're getting close. Anybody, there's 4 pictures here. 2 are from Vermont, 2 are from South Carolina. Anybody get a guess which ones are which? Not really, right? Because this could be us any day of the week that we're experiencing the same thing the southern end of the country just went through this fall. We've proved to ourselves the last 2 years that we are not exempt from this type of devastation. And somehow we continue to skate by not funding this. Really, in the big scheme of the state of Vermont, the request is $950,000. It's 1 comma, as I've heard before, out of the big picture of what we're doing. And there's been many bills that have come through in the last 2 years about flood recovery, right? And millions of dollars being done. And good, right? Like good for us. but we're not looking at the response side to fund a team that's been in existence. Again, we've put in a statute, but somehow we still haven't figured out a way to give them enough money to operate it. These two here are Vermont, the two corners, the boat and this one down on the left-hand side. The other ones are North Carolina. But this pile here is a great example, right? Chief Libby, this would take days to go through with canines and equipment, looking for bodies and recovering or rescue, hopefully people that are alive. But I think by the time we're getting to the southern end, many times we're looking at a recovery situation.
Yeah, debris field like that, multiple canines, multiple personnel hours to pick through.
Yeah. We talk about canines. Everybody loves dogs, right? Who doesn't love a dog? These dogs are what, $12,000 to $15,000 a dog. You got a life. They have a working life expectancy of 5-7 years, somewhere in there, maybe if we're lucky. Right now, they're figuring out ways every 5 years to get them back in order to train the next group of these dogs that do these rescues across the state. And these groups go out all the time. Those canines are very, very busy in the state of Vermont right now. All right, we can go down to the next one. So we talked about what does it take when a disaster strikes, right? This is a map. This is not about Vermont. This is Hurricane Helene. So when Hurricane Helene hit the bottom corner, the green piece and the purple piece, the rest of the dark blue is what it took to operate that incident. So I don't know, there's what, 6 states out of the 50 that are in this country that did not respond to that incident in the southern part of this country to assist those people when things get really, really bad. And so to think of that Vermont again is not, we're not immune to this. I don't have a good map, and maybe Director Foran does that somewhere. But when Vermont asked, there was at least 6 or 7 different state teams and the federal team in 2023 that came to the Vermont to help us in our piece, which was huge to us, right? Luckily, it wasn't a hurricane, so that just gives you an idea how much it takes to put these programs through when things happen. Again, we talked about the part-time employees. These are people that leave their families. They leave their jobs many times. I would say the USAR team is pretty much a bunch of career firefighters, a bunch of volunteer firefighters, and a bunch of people that have other disciplines in life, such as engineers, some doctors, these canine handlers, but they leave their days to come do this stuff for the state. And they may be leaving for multiple weeks on end when they say, yeah, I'll come help you guys for, I'd say probably $20 or less per hour. Don't know that rate for sure, but previously my time on that team, it wasn't anything I was making enough money to make my car payment on when these things went out the door. So I've gone through this. We're going to do a little bit more funding. So previously, Hazmat Tier 2 funded some of this program as they needed. The Department of Fire Safety move money around as they needed to try to make this work. That money's designed to support the Hazmat team, which is an even busier asset of the state of Vermont than the USAR team. They go out, I know, many times per year over what the USAR team does.
7 times last week.
7 times last week. There you go. So this team's even busier. And so we've been taking money from them to fund the USAR team when they can. But now they're at a place that they need their money back to pay for the things that need replacement. And I will say Hazmat makes USAR look really silly when it comes to how much things cost. Their equipment is very, very expensive. So that's how we filled that in. Homeland Security Grant Program. So this is also where the local municipalities come back into play. So there's recently it fell under VEM. I think it may fall under VSP now, but the Homeland Security Program for the state offers out through the federal grant, right? A program that funds Homeland Security initiatives each year. And sometimes multiple times a year if they have money left over that they are going to reissue out. This team has to apply for that. And so when they apply for that, they're taking that pot of money that the state of Vermont has to give to people that qualify, which is generally the state, local municipalities. Poly subs is really the best way to put that. And whatever money the state took, the city of Virgins no longer gets to go after, right? Because now it's decreased that pool of money that's available to local municipalities across the state for the things that they need to operate at a level. And again, this is about terrorism. We're talking about Homeland Security, but many times Homeland Security and preparedness, and certainly preparedness for disasters, interplay well with each other, like interoperable communications. So one group can talk to another group on a radio when we're downrange doing these items. So those are important things, but every time we give it to the state, City of Virgins has got that much less of a chance to get that money. And they know that, right? And I wouldn't not say the state's abusing that anyway, but it's just something as a municipality going, man, why are we getting cut short because the state hasn't again funded this program that's been along for quite a while. So that's just another piece of their funding. So the questionable. So we talked about that in the beginning with the chair about percentage of that grant. So the grant was reduced, I think 10% last year. And then who knows what it'll look like this year.
No, understood. And just an FYI for you, we finished up our budget memo for appropriations for FY 2026, and the committee is recommending a fully funded $900,000 for this purpose.
Just made me real happy. We'll see how far it goes. So I think I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
But
and
it-
we're also like, we're currently part of this as well as including this in the bill itself, so it's not just a recommendation, but depending on putting it in the bill itself.
And I can't thank you
To hang
enough.
on the point.
Because I think this, like I said in the beginning, this committee did its job last year. Senate GovOps did their job. They tried to get the money in there, and it did come out in appropriations. So most of the request here was, we're looking for this group, knowing how important it is, hearing us out to really advocate through the process so that this doesn't drop off at some place in a room when the numbers are getting tight. And we're not, I get not asking for taxpayers for more money. Like, I'm a taxpayer in Vermont. Nobody wants to pay anymore, but I also don't want to see people dying around us because we can't figure out how to pay $950,000 or whatever it was to fund a program that operates. This isn't a new program. We're not saying let's experiment. We're saying we've got this program that operates at the highest levels of professionalism. We just need to pay the bill, and that's what we're looking at.
Chief, our heads and hearts are in the same place. Representative
Can
Pistol,
you
and I do
put
want
some
to be
of the
clock
pictures?
aware because we still have to get to VLCT, and
Yeah,
I did just.
I'm pretty close. I'm pretty close here too.
Where's this, where's?
So those two pictures, I believe the bottom one definitely up in the Northeast Kingdom.
Is it two pictures or one?
Oh, this one right here. So this is definitely up there.
Oh,
I
no,
think
I'm
this
going
one is
back to
too.
The picture before.
The one above?
Yeah, but
Let me look.
yeah, like where are those feet up?
This is down in North Carolina.
Trying to figure.
I don't know whose feet that are, but we can measure them up. So, but this is North Carolina. And this is, it doesn't look much different than Vermont when we talk about
Yeah.
the trees, the grounds, what we're looking at. We're very similar in that aspect, right? Luckily, we don't have a coastline and we don't see the hurricanes come through quite as much, but we've seen it. Irene looked very similar in many places of the state than this did. Yeah. But they get to fly helicopters, so they're pretty cool too, right? It's like sometimes they get a lift. So that pretty much wraps it up, Mr. Chair. Consequences of not funding this program. I think I've harped on you guys enough through this. This is a group of people that are here to just help us, and they're just looking for money to pay the bills to keep them going every day. So I appreciate your time and thank you for having us here.
No, of course. And yeah, feel free to hang out. We are gonna move over to VLCT's testimony on this same matter. And yeah, committee, whatever you say, I did ask council on the next point of business and then later to afford time for the league.
Hello.
Hi, Sharon.
Good to see you. Share.
Popped off
Cool.
spot.
Okay, for the record, I'm Samantha Sheehan, Municipal Policy and Advocacy Specialist for the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And thank you for your time today. I am going to acknowledge in my testimony both of the flood bills that have been introduced to the committee. So H397, the one that Representative Wozniak walked through earlier, as well as H232, which is related from our perspective in its approach to addressing both flood resiliency and emergency response through expanded municipal authorities, increased investment, and the creation of new resources. VLCT and our member communities from across the state are certainly supportive of the legislature's efforts in this area broadly. I have a few very high level comments to make and may have more specific feedback on the bill language after conferring with my colleagues. We just haven't had time to go line by line, but appreciate the speed at which you're taking up the bills as well. One point of feedback from some folks at VLCT was to consider carefully where the language should be specific to flood events. And whether there are components of the bill or specific proposals where particularly for emergency management planning, that the program should be eligible for beyond flood emergencies, but just all hazard events or natural disaster responses. It was a priority coming into the session for VLCT to support the ongoing funding for the state impacted property buyout program. And we're happy to see that in 397. And we would like you to consider including support that goes to municipal governments for the relocation of threatened municipal buildings. These are important to protect the public assets that taxpayers support and have invested in, but also to ensure these emergency shelter locations are safe for future flood events. And then also I have here to consider grand list impacts. So I'll be in Ways and Means tomorrow, speaking to the governor's proposal to use a small portion of the pilot surplus for sort of a 5-year matriculation to support the municipal side of taxes, where residential properties have been bought out. We appreciate ongoing support from the legislature for abatements related to floods, so that municipalities are not on the hook for the education tax, but continue to keep that in mind. These are sensible decisions that homeowners and municipalities are making to prepare for the future and to clear the flood corridors. But it has real significant financial impacts, especially on the small rural communities and how they're able to deliver public services. It's hard to get information from FEMA that we're able to use and share in a public way. This is some anonymized data that does come from the last round of the last 2 rounds of FEMA engagement. So of the municipal entities impacted in 2024, 1/3 of them made up for 91% of the cost of damages. So we see in these flood events broad statewide impacts in terms of the emergency response. But it's sort of a terrible game of Russian roulette as to which municipalities carry these really sort of catastrophic cost impacts. 2/3 of those impacted in 24 were also hit in July of 23. And of those towns like Barry that received extreme flood impacts in both 23 and 24, 64% have a population of less than 2,000 people. So these are really small, low resource communities. I want to speak to, so this bill as proposed would consider a number of direct municipal appropriations and expanded state programs that would support municipal operations. I want to take a step back for a minute and talk about sort of general approaches to supporting investment in flood response at the municipal level. Grants are good, but they are competitive and they often require a local match. So if we go back to the understanding that small rural towns with limited public capacity and tax capacity are responding to successive flood emergencies, it becomes clear that coming up with a 10%, 20% match or even navigating a competitive grant process can be a problem. Of course, FEMA reimbursement is complex and time consuming, often takes much longer than a year. I want to repeat what the representative said, for some people, the flood never ended. That certainly is true for the municipal officials who have responded to these successive events. And quickly, before I get into our specific legislative asks, the VLCT is also advocating and has come into the session with a top priority of investments in housing, and in particular is behind a legislative proposal to allow tax increment financing for the public infrastructure that supports housing development. The governor has made a proposal called Spark. Let's Build Homes has created a proposal called HIT. We are supportive of both and hope and believe something can move forward this session that would allow this tax increment mechanism, and that it should include flood resiliency projects. So for municipal structures, as well as for sort of the flood retreat of housing. So I'm going to be explicit. We are asking for 3 amendments to the bill. We feel this is well within the jurisdiction of the Government Ops Committee. We've provided suggested language. The suggested language was developed both by VLCT attorneys and by the Vermont Bond Bank attorneys. We are coming forward with these requests in collaboration with the Vermont Bond Bank, who's a critical lending partner to local government in Vermont. And these are all Title 24 issues. These do not affect state revenues at all. These are not appropriations requests. These are requests to address the limits of authorities on municipalities in how they manage government finance in Vermont. So the first is to allow the authority for municipalities to maintain an unassigned fund balance. Some municipalities, like Barry, have a unique municipal charter authority that allows them to maintain and use an unassigned fund balance. Half of the municipalities in Vermont are not chartered and cannot develop that local authority, but this is a common, this is a basic best practice in the realm of government finance. It improves borrowing position. It helps stabilize tax rates, and it allows municipalities to be grant ready and project ready for those proactive resiliency projects. Any questions about unassigned fund balances?
I'm sure we will. We're just kind of running through this right now to digest everything.
Okay.
And it's definitely something we're gonna be asked.
Yeah.
I also want more of a critical body mass of members when we do that.
Okay. There is a famous unassigned fund balance, the UAF of Burlington, which was critical in confronting the Burlington Telecom financial crisis of the early 2010s. It is a really critical stabilizing factor for municipalities of all sizes. The other is emergency borrowing. Currently, this is simple. Currently, state law restricts municipal bodies from acquiring emergency debt for only an up to 1 year payback period. 1 year is not enough to get through FEMA. So municipalities like Plainfield are in the position of having no cash because they're not allowed to have an unassigned fund balance that is a rainy day fund. They don't have cash flow beyond property taxes. And then they are only allowed to borrow an amount of money that they can reasonably pay back within 1 year. So we're asking for that authority, that emergency borrowing authority, to go to a 5-year period so that a municipality can take on the debt it needs to address the emergency impacts of the flood, restore culverts, put roads back together, reconnect bridges, and then have the time to navigate the FEMA public assistance process, get the money, pay off the debt. And then this one's like super wonky. If you have a mortgage, you'll understand why this is important. So again, currently Vermont state law limits the ability of municipalities to be flexible in the way they structure their debt service. So state law requires municipalities to structure their debt with a level principal payment. This is unlike if you have an amortized mortgage, where you have the same amount of money that you pay for principal and interest every month for the whole life of the mortgage. Municipalities are not allowed to borrow that way. They have to pay they have to pay a level principal, which means that the interest payments up front make for a higher payment on the front end. So the bond bank made an example here. This shows level principal payments. So you can see that in this hypothetical, the municipality would be paying $8 million a year of debt service the first year. And then over the life of the debt, they would end up paying $3 million a year the last year of the loan. Whereas if they're allowed to have a level debt structure, they can structure it so that it's an even $6 million a year of debt service across the life of the debt. This provides a lot of stability and predictability for the municipal government, but also for, more importantly, taxpayers. And so we're just asking for the option, keep the old way. This is available to municipalities now. We want to add this option. That's all.
Thank you. Any questions for the league right now? No? All right, we are definitely gonna sit down with you folks and hone this stuff in as we start to build the package a little bit tighter.
Cool.
Is town meeting break for us, an off week for you?
No.
Cool.